Hi, this is Claire Praitzia from Berry Do Papery, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make this card using ZIG Clean Color Real brush pens and some new stamps from Hero Arts. The new stamps that I'm using are Peonies, which is a clear stamp set that has a large peony image, 2 peony buds, and then some little peony leaves. It also comes with some sentiments, and you can purchase coordinating dies separately. We're not going to be doing any die cutting today, so just put those to the side. Another new stamp that I'm using is Artistic Peony, which is the same style as the Peony stamp set. You can also get coordinating dies for that, but again, just using the woodblock stamp. So the first thing I'm going to do with this card is I'm going to take a piece of Bristol cardstock and I'm going to prep it with some anti-static powder because we are going to be doing some heat embossing. So the reason we're doing heat embossing for this card is because we're going to be coloring it with ZIGs, and I really want there to be I want the flower stamped in pink, but we're going to be coloring the flowers in with blue, and I don't want any of the blue coloring to go over over those pink lines and kind of dull any of the lines. That's actually what kind of happened with the card in the pictures, because that's what I did for the catalog. I was just experimenting. I wasn't really planning ahead of time. But when I was making this video specifically for this hop, I realized that I didn't want any of that blue kind of dulling any of those lines. So I wanted to heat emboss it to prevent that from happening. So instead of stamping your image in the rose madder first and then stamping it with VersaMark on top of that, if you don't have a MISTI, it's going to be really hard to align it. If you do have a MISTI, you can do it, but it is an extra step. Whereas with this, you can just ink it up with VersaMark first. That will give it the stickiness, and then ink it up with the colored ink, and that will give it the color, and you save yourself a step. It's not quite as sticky as if you would just stamp the VersaMark on top of it separately, but I'm lazy and I don't want to take that extra time, so I just do the shortcut, add my VersaMark first, and then the pink ink. So the VersaMark will give me the stickiness, the pink ink gives me the color. I don't have to stamp them separately. Then I'm adding some clear sparkle embossing powder on top of that, and then I'm heat setting it. So pretty quick and simple. Now for coloring. I'm only using 2 colors here. I'm using Cornflower Blue and I'm using Shadow Mauve. And the way I color with my ZIGs, maybe it's not the best way to color, but the way I color is I like to add my dark color first, kind of along the lines where I want the image to be the darkest. So you can see I'm adding that cornflower where the petals come out, where they would be the darkest. And then I'm teasing it out with a Shadow Mauve. And that's going to be the dark leaves. And for the light leaves, I'm not doing any blending with it. I'm just adding the Shadow Mauve. And honestly, I've been saying mauve for years. And I started filming this and I was thinking, I don't think I'm pronouncing that right. So I looked it up and apparently it's mauve. So if you hear me slipping into mauve, you know why. But anyway, so for coloring this image, I found that it was easier for me to keep track of the petals and how the light would hit them, I guess, if I colored first with the mauve. I did the lightest parts first, and then I kind of went around and did the darker petals. So I color in those light bits first. I'm not doing any blending, and then I add my Cornflower Blue for the dark petals, and then I tease it out with the Shadow Mauve. So a tip for ZIGs, the reason why I'm doing pretty much each petal separately is because I found that the sooner you can blend a color out, if you put a dark color down, the sooner you can get in with the lighter color or even another darker color. The sooner you can get in with the next color and blend it out, the better it blends. I have this, quick little picture here to show you that I had on the one side I have the Cornflower Blue that I blended immediately with a Shadow Mauve, and on the other side I have Cornflower Blue that dried for about an hour or 2, I think, and then I blended it out with the shadow. And it blended out okay after, with the Cornflower Blue having dried a bit, but I had to kind of work the Shadow Mauve a little bit more into it, and it still didn't blend quite as well, and it also kind of, because I was adding more of that shadow mauve, I was tearing up the paper a little bit. It's not super obvious, but because I had to tease it out more, it did kind of, the paper did start to pill just a little bit. So if you're doing intense blending, you want to kind of get in there as quickly as you can. So I did the same coloring process for the other peonies. And for the center, I first went in with some light carmine, and it looked a little bit flat, so I looked at my color chart to try to figure out what would be a close match that would add a little bit of dimension. I don't know if dimension is the right word for it, but would add a little bit of, I don't know, a little extra something to the centers. And I ended up using Carmine Red to add that extra something. And right here, I actually had gone out of the lines a little bit. And that's one of the reasons why I really like using ZIGs, is because they're water-based. If you go out of the lines a little bit, and as long as the color's not super dark, you can usually get away with adding a little bit of water to that bit that came out of the lines and pulling that color off with a paper towel. So that's what I did there. And right now I'm just rubbing paper towel over the entire thing in case there's any ZIG ink resting on top of the embossed image. So then I can just pull it off with the paper towel and I don't have to worry about accidentally smearing some ink later. With our peonies colored, we're going to go ahead and stamp the sentiment. The sentiment actually comes with the thanks on the left side, but I wanted it centered, so I cut it apart. And I know some people are not fond of cutting apart their sentiments, so you can mask it off if you want to, but when you have high quality stamps, you can cut them apart and they go back together pretty easily, so that's what I did. And yes, my big noggin did get in there because I can't align things unless I'm looking directly above whatever I'm trying to align. So I promise I'm not doing anything extra when my head's getting in the way of that sentiment there. I'm just trying to align it. So I know some people don't like seeing my head, but I got to align it. So once I have that aligned, I want to add a little something on the bottom. So I took a scratch piece of vellum, and I used some pinking shears and just sheared the bottom of that. And then I'm adhering that sentiment that I've trimmed down to the vellum. Just trimming off that excess, and then I'm going to adhere that to the card. Before I adhere the sentiment, I realized that that right top corner was looking a little bit bare, so I wanted to add another image, so I ended up using the smallest leaf from the stamp set, and I did the same process that I did in the beginning. I added some anti-static powder to the corner, then I inked up that leaf with VersaMark, then rose madder ink, and then covered it with some clear sparkle embossing powder, and then heat set that. Just be careful when you're doing this if you're adding it after you've colored the flowers. Just make sure you don't get the embossing powder on the flowers because we just colored them. They're going to be a little bit damp. If the embossing powder gets on there, it's going to want to stick. And it's not going to be super firm because you didn't use VersaMark there. It's not really sticky. It's just wet. But just try to avoid getting the embossing powder on there. You can see I just put it on in the corner. And if you do get it on the flower, you can just brush it off with a paintbrush or something. But anyway, after I heat set that, I decided to make the card base for the card. The reason I didn't make this, an actual one layer card where I stamped everything on the card base was because I was heat setting things and that kind of tends to warp the card base. So I just made it a panel so I could adhere it to a card base later, and the card base would be flat, and that would usually kind of help flatten the embossed panel. So I got my card panel all scored and trimmed, and this is the part of the video where I realized that the piece of cardstock that I started out with, this Bristol cardstock, it wasn't actually A2 size. I think it's A4 size, which is 4 inches by 5.5 instead of 4 1/4 by 5.5. So I because I was using a card base that kind of matched the flowers, I considered leaving that extra strip on the side, but then I decided I didn't really care for it, so this card is actually a skinny version of the pictures. So it's not the exact same card because the card that I took pictures of was the card I sent into the catalog, and I wasn't going to take pictures of basically the same card. So after I adhered the card panel down to the card base, the last step was to actually finally adhere that sentiment that I've been talking about adhering, and then add some stickles. I think it's Stardust, yeah, Stardust stickles, and then set that off to dry. So that finishes off the card. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave it on my blog or you can leave it in the YouTube comment section. And I will have supplies linked to my blog and I will have them listed in the video description. Thanks so much for watching and have a great day. God bless.